Man, Saturn and Taurus is a fascinating energy. Where to begin? I think one of the first places to begin is let's bring up some different examples of people who have or had Saturn and Taurus and kind of examine how that worked in their lives, how it manifested, and then we'll talk more about the general stuff. So, something I find very interesting, John Lennon had Saturn and Taurus, as did FDR, Stephen Hawking has it, and Vincent Van Gogh and Alexander the Great. So, analyzing these people, let's start with Lennon. So, Saturn and Taurus can very much be... Actually, let's cover some general stuff first. Saturn and Taurus is... very interesting. Wherever Saturn is present in our chart, it provides huge obstacles when we're younger. Out of all the planets, it provides the most affliction, one could say. Really, what it's offering is the opportunity to get something really right in this life. Wherever Saturn is in our chart is our greatest challenge and potentially, with time especially, our greatest gift. And so, what's so interesting with Saturn in any of the Earth signs, but especially Taurus, is when younger, the limit is very real. It's very structured, and very often it has to do with... I find all the Saturn and Earth placements are all about routine, getting the material world all set up, and they're all very much love structure. They thrive on structure. They need it. So I don't know what that says so much about their childhood, but it seems to have basically been a very structured environment that promoted this structured attitude to life. Structured doesn't always mean stable, though, or providing what was needed on certain levels. In all of the people that we've listed, yes, there was enough, but there was also that fear of there not being enough. In the case of Lennon, for example, he had a very estranged relationship. His parents were very estranged from him. And he lived with his aunt, and she wasn't the most, ironically, she wasn't the most supportive of his musical career. What would eventually yield his Saturn and Taurus gifts of just incredible material success and incredible mastery of the material realm. Well, when younger, that stability was not there. That promise of material wealth was not there. The Beatles crafted new paths and on new frontiers that nobody ever could have imagined. I mean, so many musicians have been discouraged by their parents, but his Aunt Mimi, who he lived with, I believe this is after his mother passed away, another example of that restriction, and his father was just not in the picture at all from what I've come to understand of his life. It very much was an environment of want. And I find that so frequently with this energy is, yes, in later life it's capable of so much incredible wealth and material gain, as well as incredible understanding of values, of why, of being very humble and grounded. Saturn and Taurus is a wonderfully grounded energy. But there is that fear of reverting back to childhood needs, back to childhood wants. And so that's one of the challenges with Saturn and Taurus, is those psychological habits gained from harsh material experiences. Basically, not having enough, not having what you feel like you need. And so even when later on in years you have millions and millions of dollars, and all of the material security that you could wish for, very often, very similar to the case of Saturn and Cancer, because of childhood habits and conditioning, it feels like it's never enough. I feel like you always have to protect your material gains, no matter how ridiculously exorbitant they are. No matter how much money you have, it always feels like there's a hole. Now, that's not inevitable, not at all, but that is the challenge I find with Saturn and Taurus, because of really tough experiences when younger in having enough money. And we should note, Saturn isn't the planet of, for example, Jupiter in comparison. Jupiter is the one that comes along and is like, hello, I am the biggest planet in the solar system. I'm all about expansion of horizons and especially material wealth and prosperity. I have no limitations. So, you want wealth? Yeah, here you go. It comes randomly. Not so much. Saturn is about hard work. If you look at the nature of that planet, its rings are so constricted, concentric circles. I mean, it's a very perfect order happening there, and a very pristine and calm order as they spin around the planet. And what's very interesting too is the nature of the planet itself. It has so much pressure on the north and south poles that it's not actually a sphere but an oblong shape. So it's actually being pushed out in the sides. That's how much pressure this planet is about. And so it takes years of hard work, years of discipline and focus, especially when Taurus is involved, to bring about material well-being and gain. Now, this is the beautiful news. What comes randomly and as a flash in the case of Jupiterian energy will also leave randomly in a flash. You know, for example, a classic, curious Jupiter story is winning the lottery and then squandering it all. And so a year later, you not only, potentially don't have any of the money you just won, but you also have to pay taxes on that money or something. That's Jupiterian energy. It's a lot. It's wild. It's reckless. Also, Saturn is the exact opposite. It is so structured that it's confining. It is so frustrating. I have so many friends who have Saturn in the house of Taurus, and I find a huge similarity in how those energies function. If not, pretty much the same thing for the most part. I'm still looking into all that. But essentially, in all of my the cases of my friends who have Saturn in the house of Taurus, it's very similar to Saturn. The restriction of their material well-being, especially at this age when we're much younger. Them being around 22 or so, I can feel the crunch with them, that restriction of Saturn saying, well, I don't know if I can just say it's all Saturn. We shouldn't be blaming Saturn for anything. At the end of the day, again, wherever Saturn is, it's our greatest ally. It gives us our greatest gifts. And so those same friends who are struggling so badly, so much to work so hard to get things done, to have success, rather, to have stability and security, material security, that discipline is going to lead to their ridiculous riches later on. And still, it's hard to communicate that to them at this point when they're just like, fuck, how many years of 9 to 5 do I need to go through? Oh my god. It's challenging. Saturn, wherever it lands in our chart, it is challenging, especially in this current economic climate where Pluto's in Capricorn, a lot of corruption's happening and a lot of unfair economic practices are afoot. It's very frustrating, I understand, with this energy of Saturn and Taurus, and to feel like, when is this finally going to pay off? Now, the beautiful thing is this. Taurus is patient. Taurus is strong. It moves one step at a time. And especially with Saturn involved, the success is inevitable, as long as you stay on the right track. Now, Taurus can be so stubborn, too stubborn, and they can insist on staying on track that isn't going to work for them. So that is something to keep in mind. But ultimately, you know what's the right track and what other people really have no idea. They may have ideas, they may have whatever, but you know what you're meant to succeed in, what your natural skill talents are. And I really urge you to not be so obsessed about security and to focus more on your development. I liken earth energy to basically growing a garden. If you choose the right seeds, if you water it right, not too much emotion, but just enough emotion to keep it going, then you have your garden, you have your trees, your forests. But you have to choose the right seeds, because otherwise you're going to find yourself working year after year after year doing something that is not fulfilling you. You're going to end up with a flower that you're like, that's nice, why the fuck did I grow that? And that, to have a direct analogy, basically you'll have gained money for doing a job that you couldn't care less about. Can we control that? In the short term, perhaps not. It does take a while to be able to make a living doing something that we love. Is it possible? Absolutely. And if that's what you find, if that's what the goals, whatever your goals are, set them now. Set the priorities now. I really urge you to do this, because you are going to succeed at them. So it's very important that they're something that you really wish for. It's a material security that you're really seeking for. Ah, man, Saturn and Taurus can be so wrapped up in the material affairs of the world, in money, who has it, who doesn't, how to get it, how to keep it, that it overwhelms everything else in their life because of fear of scarcity. I would say of all the Saturns, this one is most afraid of ending up on the street. Let's face it. Let's face some realities about our world. We are human beings. Do we insist, if not at the very least encourage, that all of us live for the tribe? Very monkey-like human beings that we're being. Yes, absolutely. Do we all care about other human beings? Maybe not as much, obviously, as close family or friends, but ultimately there is that kinship that is more similar than not. That strength of being human. That connection, that similar bond. If you end up on the street, it's not the end of the world. You're going to find a way. I know how absolutely ridiculous that seems to a lot of Saturn and Taurus people. But ultimately, you got to let go of these material fears. Because human beings are going to take care of you. It's not even about human beings. The world, this home of ours, this nurturer that has nurtured all of us to this point and will continue unless we exploit it to abandon like we've been doing. But I think we're learning our lessons, and I think we're going to continue learning. So I don't think that we'll kill ourselves, which is always nice. But still, fear of destitution is definitely something to be worked on for Saturn and Earth energies, and especially Saturn and Taurus. Now, is that the ideal situation? No. Can we be working to make sure that that doesn't happen? We can do our best, certainly. But ultimately, we are going to be taken care of. As long as we're doing our best, And we don't need to pursue that with some kind of ridiculous, obsessive attitude. With Saturn and Taurus, I can find that material obsession runs to detriment. That you're so focused on the material plane, having enough. Do I have enough? That you waste your energies on all of these practices that really just get you to worry more. Because if you focus on your lack, the lack is going to increase. If you focus on what you have is going to increase. That's a great quote by, who is it? I think it's Ravi Shankar, Sri Sri Ravi Shankar. Pretty sure it's him. But somebody said that, and it's absolutely true, and especially true for Saturn and Taurus. There's something involved with fate, too, with Saturn. And so, this is a bit more esoteric, but it's fascinating how in this life with Saturn and Taurus, there seems to be the emphasis on privation, on deprivation, when you're younger, not having enough, so that later you can have all that you want because you've worked so hard over the years to develop your skills that become so lucrative, or whatever. I mean, that works in the case of Pablo Picasso, Vincent Van Gogh, Alexander the Great, perfect example. Lenin, of course. In the case of Alexander, he had to be educated by Aristotle first. He had to grow up before he was able to conquer his empire. I mean, one of the grandest, biggest empires in human history had a Saturn and Taurus emperor. Perfect example. And Lenin, one of the most famous, most successful musicians in human history, if not, one of the top 5, I would say, easy. Saturn and Taurus. Pablo Picasso. I mean, the list goes on. So, if you get rid of the psychological need for resources, and you just focus on your own self, that's your greatest resource, ultimately. Money, property, relationships, no, that's not what you're really looking for. What you're looking for is inner stability, inner security, inner love. It's a lot easier said than done to achieve that. But ultimately, what do you need to do that? Your psychological understanding of yourself. Examining your past experiences, understanding why perhaps childhood was so robbed of abundance on some level, of some kind of security. Why it was so difficult sometimes, or perhaps still is. And work through these, knowing that you are going to reach your goal. Slow and steady wins the race. And there's no slower, no steadier than Saturn and Taurus. I know it's very frustrating at how slow the pace can go for material acquisition, but you will get there. And when you do get there, it's stable for the rest of your life, as long as you do it right. And again, it all comes down to your priorities. It all comes down to where you are right now, planting those seeds. And by seeds, I mean good ideas for the future. Stuff that you can see yourself dedicating effort towards. dedicating funds towards, because you know it's going to have a return. Saturn in Taurus is a wonderful business person, but you've got to get rid of the fear. You've got to get rid of all of that want. Honestly, studying Buddhism and understanding that material reality attachments bind us, they don't free us, is a very important thing. And getting out of the American-led consumerist mindset of more is better also is very important. Because otherwise you're going to find yourself in just a excess material state of, you go of any state from who knows, there's all, just let your imagination run wild on that one. I find it really curious that both FDR and Stephen Hawking have Saturn in Taurus, considering, again, Saturn's limitation, its fate-oriented energy, and Taurus, their physical selves, their bodies in this case. You know, FDR obviously was handicapped, quadriplegic? No, paraplegic? I never know the difference. I think it's paraplegic. But basically he had to use a wheelchair, and as you know, Stephen Hawking, I don't know which disease he has, but in both cases, very, very interesting that Saturn. I'd love to do a past life regression with Mr. Hawking and see if in past lives if there's some distant, subtle memory. And even more interestingly, in this current life, how has Saturn and Taurus led to his incredible genius? How has it aided his mind in the acquisition of wisdom and knowledge? What has he gained from this restriction? It's fascinating. And I'm sure his answer would be incredibly revelational and give everyone so much to think about what is the true use and worth of the body. Vincent Van Gogh, another very interesting example of deprivation, of not having enough material resources. And I know that may seem like a really disheartening example, but look at the success he's had after his death. And let's face it, we're in a different age, different time than then. There was a lot more challenges going on, and that definitely impeded upon his material successes. And so, in this day and age of growth and people growing even closer together in business and all spheres of human life, Saturn and Taurus will yield its return in your lifetime. It's just about the awareness. It's just about the hard work put into it and the discipline. That's all for now. Namaste.